Hello to our friends and family from your friends here at the Financial Advisor Group. We just wanted to pass along an update now that we're here about halfway, a little bit more than halfway through April, and give you sort of three main things today. One, we want to continue with some educational component to these videos. So last month we talked about Roth conversions. This month we'll talk a little bit about what are called qualified charitable distributions. What are they? And the last two things we'll talk about where we see the economy today and how that ties into sort of where we see the markets today. So without further ado, if we just want to dive right in and get into, first we'll start with the educational part of this. And what we'd say today is, this topic is steered towards people with charitable intent, right? To start there. If there's charitable intent in mind, then one of the questions can be what's the most efficient way to get funds to that charity? There's really two ways. One is through what's called appreciated securities, simply a stock that you bought in a non-IRA account that's got up a lot in value. If you were to sell it, you have to pay taxes on that gain, and then you could gift it to the charity, but you have to pay taxes first. You do have the ability to gift that directly to the charity as the stock itself without selling it. The charity then sells it, doesn't have to pay the tax at all. So they actually get the whole portion without, and you're cutting out Uncle Sam, right? Anytime we can cut out Uncle Sam, that's a good thing. That's basically the same thought process behind what's called a QCD, or a qualified charitable distribution, which we'll focus on in the next minute or two. What is a qualified charitable distribution? A qualified charitable distribution is when we take funds directly from an IRA and get them directly to a charity. So it's not us writing the check anymore. It's the check coming directly from the IRA payable to, let's say, the Alzheimer's Association, and that check gets directly sent to the charitable organization. This simple chart below just shows that is the donor. Let's say it's myself. I contact my IRA custodian as long as I meet some of the requirements, which we'll talk about on the next page. And that money goes directly to charity as opposed to coming to me. And therefore, we're cutting out the IRS. Again, cutting out Uncle Sam from this. So there is the ability that I could write the check directly to Alzheimer's Association from my checkbook, but that money has already had taxes paid on it. However, I also have the ability to get money directly from my IRA to the charity through what's called a qualified charitable distribution, and therefore I cut out Uncle Sam. So I don't have to pay tax on those monies, either does the charity. That's the win-win. So what are the rules behind these? 6 key rules. One, you've got to be 70 and a half, right? That's the most important rule to all of this. Once you hit age 70 and a half, you are eligible and you have an IRA, you have the ability to do qualified charitable distributions. Second, it must be to a qualified charity, meaning something like a designated 501c3 corporation. That's most charities we think of today. Asterisk here, side note, unfortunately, this doesn't include kids. This doesn't include grandkids, and it doesn't include paying tuition with it either. We all wish it did. Third, and we talked about this a little bit, it must be a direct transfer. The funds cannot go from the IRA into my hands and then to the charity. They've got to go directly from the IRA to the charity. So as long as that IRA makes the check payable to the charity, it cuts out Uncle Sam completely. Fourth, there's some limits. Really one limit, up to $100,000 a year that you can do QCDs. So anything up to that limit. A little caveat to this too is you can use qualified charitable distributions to meet your required minimum distribution, which is something you have to do after age 73. So you can actually use a qualified charitable distribution to count towards your required distribution. Number 5, report it correctly. When you get that distribution, you'll get a 1099 that shows you took the distribution. You just need to make sure your accountant knows, or whoever's doing your taxes, that you did what's called a QCD. That's the most important part. And last, of course, with all charitable contributions, you just need to make sure that there's a receipt of something showing that you made that contribution. The real benefit here is we're cutting out Uncle Sam. A couple of years ago, they raised the standard deduction. So a lot of us really aren't getting the deduction we used to get for making charitable contributions. So now by using a qualified charitable distribution, not only can we get the benefit of the higher standard deduction, but we can also get the benefit of that charitable deduction as well. So something to talk about in upcoming meetings with us. If you meet these requirements and have charitable intent, we'd love to talk it through with you. And it's really a great way for both charities and for you to fulfill goals. It's a really great tool that the IRS and the government has out there for us. On to the markets, right? The one comment, and we've said this probably throughout the last year or two, things are good. And we know there's things to complain about. We'll get there in a minute or two. But one of the problems, which we'll talk about the theme in the next couple of minutes, is things might be too good. What do we mean by that, right? Things are good. The job market's steady. People are making money. Their incomes are at the highest they've ever been. And people aren't afraid to lose money. Or, sorry, aren't afraid to lose their job. When that happens, what do? We've said it all year. We spend money. We can see that right here. This chart defines what's happening right now. US retail sales are at an all-time high and continue to climb continually. We continue to spend money. That's a good thing. In this economy, it's good to keep jobs going. How can that be a problem? Well, let's back up a little bit. Why are we spending money? Well, the job market's so strong. We know the unemployment rate right now is below 4%. It's been there for about 2 years, the longest stretch in history. Also, if you look at this chart here, this shows you the percentage of people aged 25 to 54 that are working today. There's about 83% of the population, what we call the prime working population, working today. That's almost at the highest level it's ever been. So there's a mass amount of people who are working today, yet there's demand for a lot of products. So there's demand for workers. When there's demand for workers, one, I'm not going to be afraid I'm going to lose my job. And two, I'm making more because workers, the employers have to pay me more. Again, so far, this is all good stuff. What's the downside to that? Well, if we keep making money and we have jobs and we're confident, we keep spending it. Again, we'll eventually get to the downside to this. This is a great example. If you look in the last 10 years, the amount of money we spend, the blue line is the amount of money we spend eating out as a country at restaurants. The orange line is what we spend at grocery stores. These numbers were pretty close. Of course, COVID broke every chart. But in the last 2-3 years, it had just skyrocketed that we're spending more and more money eating out. Well, what's one of the things we complain about the most? How expensive it is to eat out today. Yet we keep doing it. So here's where the problem comes in. We're making more money. We're confident we're not going to lose our jobs. So we're willing to spend it. Well, what's the incentive of a restaurant to cut their prices if there's a line outside the door of people coming in to eat? Right? So we're almost creating our own problem here. I'd argue that's okay. Like, this isn't perfect, but it's good. The flip side is, how do we get these prices to come down? I don't think you want to know the answer. It's a recession. You need to stop that demand. So right now we have a decision to make. Yes, we don't like paying more to eat out. We'll complain about it, but we keep doing it. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that things are good. And in some ways we're creating our own problem, and that's okay, because I think we have to be careful what we wish for in prices coming down. This leads into when our price is going to come down. Well, we've made progress. Inflation 1 to 2 years ago was hovering around 8, 9, 10% growth year over year. We're hanging in right now around that 3 to 3.5% level. It's sticky, as we call it. Well, as long as we keep spending money at the pace we are, it's going to be hard for inflation to fall considerably. And herein lies, we'll go back to the story about my parents. Because of this, my parents are on their way back home. They're not on their way to Ireland yet. So because of that, I can't have my party yet. The market can't settle down and be calm. If inflation starts showing sign of cooling closer to 2%, the Federal Reserve, aka my parents, the Federal Reserve, will be more confident to lower rates, and my parents will leave and get on the plane. Then the party can start. Right now, because the economy is actually doing so well, the Fed is backing off its idea of lowering rates. Hence, my parents are backing off the idea of heading to Ireland. They're going to come home for a little bit and hang out. So me, as the one who wants the party, I might struggle. I might not get that party for a little bit longer. We might have to wait a little bit longer, but that's okay. The party's eventually going to happen. The Fed is going to eventually cut rates. We just need to be a little bit patient here. What does this mean for markets? Two pictures up on the screen. One, let's focus on the chart on the left first. What you see is the market may be tired. What do we mean by that? Here's where the picture's up. A couple days ago, I was lucky and privileged enough to get the run in my 4th Boston Marathon. As you see, the picture, I was able to cross the finish line. What a great city, what an amazing event. and so proud to be able to say that I've run this again. But when you run a race, you can sometimes start out too fast. And if you start out too fast, it doesn't mean you're not going to finish. You just slow down. And what we'd argue is this market probably went too fast the last couple of months. We've come a long way over the last year, even the last 4 or 5 months, that the market is up about 20% in the last 4 or 5 months and about 20% for the last year. When that happens, it makes sense for the market to take a little breather. It makes sense for me if I started out Boston too fast, which I did, to slow down in the second half of the race. And that's okay because I still finished. We'd rather have the market slow down now than continue to speed up and eventually crash over. So it's okay. It makes sense for this market to slow down a little bit here. We've used the analogy before of that balloon. It's okay for the balloon to let some air out. In fact, we'd argue it's healthy. It was healthy for me to cut back on my pace in Boston so that I could still finish, as opposed to pushing myself too much and not being able to make it to the finish line. And these slowdowns, if you would, or these letting air out, as someone said to me the other day, you mean the market's going to go down? Yeah, this happens. This is healthy. This chart here just shows that on average, 7 times a year, the market falls 3%. We hadn't had that at all until the last week or two. That happens typically 7 times a year. In fact, about 3.5 times a year, you get a 5% correction in the market. We're still not there yet, but we're due one, if not multiple. And about once a year, we get that 10% correction. We're still not even close to that yet. But it would make sense to expect at some point this year, we are going to get that. So big picture, things are good. In fact, they're almost too good that it's creating this inflation issue that just won't go away. But be careful what we wish for here, because we can get prices to fall, but that may have to mean a recession's coming with it. Let's be patient right now and let this inflation slowly work itself out of the system, because we just need to be careful what we wish for. Eventually, my parents are going to Ireland, I promise. Then we can focus on having that party a couple months down the road. Thank you very much. We hope you appreciated the info on Qualified Charitable Distributions. If you have questions, or if you do have that charitable intent, we would certainly love to discuss them in our future meetings. If you have other ideas and topics you'd want us to consider, please just shoot us an email, and we'd love to cover them in future videos. Thank you, as always, for the trust and confidence you place in us. And as always, do your best to make it a great day.